favorite story here. It's from That Fine Madness, and it's also this part of the book was dedicated to a friend that my mom's friend who passed away before I wrote the book, and I named the character after her. And okay, this is towards the last page here. A tap on his shoulder awoke him, and Achike jerked upright. The sun rays caught his eyes, and he momentarily closed them, shielding them with his hand. The sun was fierce. Sweat dripped from his chin to his Ankara kaftan, drenching his collar. When his eyes stopped hurting, he opened them and he turned to the person beside him. It was Mrs. Kaloub. Her eyes were wide with surprise. "You are still here? I thought you came to the church." Achike straightened up. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a few people walking down the street, mostly in small groups. Most had Bibles in their hands. "Not yet, but I will come soon," he replied. "I am still waiting for Rahila. We will come to the church together." "What are you saying? Church just ended. It's almost 1 p.m. The look in her eyes shifted from surprise to sheer horror. "You mean Rahila is not yet back?" Something twitched in Achike's eye. Later, when the hours turned into days, days into weeks, and weeks into months, when the police began a missing persons investigation, and nothing but a cold trail of inconsistent stories, zero evidence, and confusion persisted, when Rahila's husband was arrested and tortured, but still maintained his innocence, when the school was thoroughly searched and no evidence was found, when ABU Zara was contacted and nobody could testify to the enrollment of any Rahila Zang, when fear, panic, and terror were gradually replaced with skepticism, doubt, and anguish, when everything else fell apart, that he had no option but to praise a God he never believed in. Achike would remember that twitch in his eye, quick, like a light switch turned off. Darkness shrouded his thought process. A panic with human hands, palms over his eyes, closing him away from reality. The reality, a life he lost from that day, the day he never saw Rahila again. This part of the book is towards the end of the story when Rahila went missing without a trace, and she was a married woman, but he fell in love with her. He was an NYSC. He was doing his NYC in Jos, and he met her, and he fell in love with her. And this is a young man who was going through a lot of, he was really damaged, and this was a light in his life for that short time. And for she to be taken away without, explanation, without no trace, it hurt him, and it put him into a place. I left that place open. I just ended the story in such a way that for the readers, because that's how I end my stories, I leave it for people to go back and end the story themselves. And when she went missing, it killed him inside, basically. But these were just from the moments of when she went missing. And this story was dedicated to my mom's friend who left her husband and basically also went missing for a long time, for close to 2 years, until she was later found. And I felt like this was the only way I could, kind of honor her. So, yeah. Any questions?
Hi, Amara.
Hi.
So Son of Man is a collection of short stories,
Yes.
and we are in the early bird session talking about young writers. As a young writer yourself, I just wanted to find out how you've pitched this collection of short stories to your publishers, Parisha, and how you also pitched your story to Ankara Press to be published under Cassava Republic. I think we'd like to know about publishing as for young writers here.
Yeah. The collection of short stories, I pitched it to first Richard Ali of Parisha. I just went on Facebook and I found him because I found out that he was a lawyer in my law school. He went to my law school, so I had to,
do it. I felt like I had that opportunity where I could at least show him my work and see if he would like it enough to pitch it to Asafi, who is the CEO of Parisher Publishers. And he showed her, and she called me on the phone, and I'll never forget that day. And she told me that she was going to publish it. This was after Ankara Press had already accepted my romance novel with them. That one came from Chinelo Onwalo, and I sent it to them. It wasn't, honestly, it wasn't a good draft. It was much later when BB and Amara, we sat down and we talked about it. They were like, you didn't send an amazing draft, but it was amazing for us at that time. And it made me very confident in writing, because I knew my work wasn't perfect. It wasn't, I even till now, my work is not perfect. I keep honing my skills every single day. But that was something that I took away with me, because it strengthened my writing. It gave me the belief that I was actually doing something that someone would actually read and love. And I think just the same way I always tell anyone who is, thinking of publishing, I mean, it may not be amazing to you, but it could be amazing to the publisher and to the agents you have. Just send it out there. Don't keep it to yourself. So that's basically how I got it.
Yeah, good morning. You talked about how nonfiction, you gain from nonfiction from the experience of people around you and try to make it into the book. I would like to know how you straddle between these two genres, between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, recently I started having more love for nonfiction, especially because, like I said, as a lawyer, there are so many people you meet, and I always love listening to people's stories. Apart from being paid to do that as a lawyer, but I always want to listen because I feel people have so much to say, and there's a balance I keep, basically. Most of my experiences, my real life experiences, I turn them into fiction and then, write these books. But then the nonfiction is still there because it's where the stories basically come from. Sometimes I go for fiction when, I feel that the story is probably very emotionally, it's something that the client I'm talking to or the person I'm talking to wouldn't want that information and his name or her name put out there. So I make it fiction, and then I try to balance the two, and I keep them the best I can.
When you were writing your book, you said you met your publisher on Facebook. Okay, so was there any intention of publishing when you were writing the book? And then how long did it take you to write Son of Man?
Okay. When I was writing the book, honestly, because I'm that kind of person, when I'm writing, I feel like I'm writing for myself than for the next person. I try to, it's like I'm putting everything in me down on paper. So there was no intention. It was actually my flatmate at the time. She came into my room, and then she just looked in, and she read it when I was in the bathroom, and she was like, "This is really good. I don't think you should keep this to yourself. Do you know anybody?" She was so interested in the fact that I was, and then I was like, okay, I know this guy who is, related to a publishing house. And then she kept coming around asking me to send it out, and I sent it out to him, to Richard. And normally when I'm writing, I really don't think about publishing, because I feel like there's the only way, if there's a way I can put in my words out there, it's just for me. There's so much of my work that I haven't showed anyone yet, and I don't think I'll show anyone. I do it for myself. But of course, sometimes when you start getting published, I mean, it comes into your head, okay, I have to publish this. But at that time, no, I wasn't. And then it took me, I would say it took me a couple of months, because I was doing my NYC and I had stuff to do. I think it took me 2 months, just on and off. But yeah, that was as much as it took me.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question to you is, I've read your book,
Thank you.
and I found it interesting, especially your style. I found it experimental. So I'm interested in knowing, this is your first book. I'm interested in knowing what your influences were the reason why you approached this book the way that you did.
Like I said, it's basically about men's feelings. Men are not always, they don't, show that emotion. And I wanted to use those objects because I felt like the only thing a man could use to express his love. I mean, if I remember when I got my dad a gift Christmas, and I think that was probably the only time I got him a gift because he's not really interested. And I remember how his face lit up and he was so happy just because I got him a pair of shoes. It wasn't even all that they were expensive shoes. They were actually, second hand. But he was so happy that I gave it to him. And my dad's not a hugger, but he hugged me, and he was so happy about it. So I felt like those were the things that probably they show a little bit of emotion. And those things were the things that could speak for these men if they were not saying how they felt.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Diekara, and I'm going to be talking about my book, how it came about, and what it's about. But I have a little Ake festival story to share, so I'll do that first. So I came to Ake Festival in 2013. I think that was the maiden edition, yes. And I was really young and curious. I was excited about seeing Wole Soyinka. I think it was about that I actually came to Abeokuta and it was going to be on the show. So I came there, I was sneaking about, and there was so much love, so much compassion. I was welcomed so much. And it was really inspiring for me because I'd actually just finished my manuscript for When Lemons Grow on Orange Trees. Nobody knew, but they were still so loving and so compassionate, and they, did everything that I needed, told me everywhere I needed to be and things like that. And on the bus yesterday, I was sharing the story with some of my friends, and the question was, oh, really, how was it in 2013? I said it was actually really great. I didn't think it could get better, but we're here in 2017 and it's growing every year. So I think we should give a wonderful round of applause to this phenomenal woman, Miss Oloruntoba. She's doing something really amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, so like I said, I wrote When Lemons Grow on Orange Trees in 2012. I just finished secondary school, and I was in boarding school and a bit detached from a lot that was happening. So I finished secondary school and came home to a lot of realities that I was reading about in the newspapers. And if you remember 2013, the headlines, especially about terrorism in the north, was really gory. You see some things like really high numbers of people who had died and stuff. And there were so many other small stories about rape, and as a young person, I was really hurt and upset. And I felt a bit detached also from all those realities. And that was when I started writing this book. And the idea of writing the book was directed at myself, really was some sort of introspection. And also to reach out to others who, like myself, are generally perhaps middle class, and we hear about these things, we read about them in the papers every day, but we don't necessarily have to confront them, and our fences, protect us. And the idea was to show how these things affect us. Once they're within our society, they affect us, and one day, it might just come to your doorstep. You don't know. So the idea was to show how this class shift could happen, and people who were generally comfortable could become uncomfortable by the things happening in the society. And because of that, the need for people to react or to get into conversations about these things, because, even when you're not really there, you're there, it's your country. So When Lemons Grow on Orange Trees is a story about a family of 5 children who like I said, are generally middle class, and then at the beginning they're attacked by armed robbers who kill their father, rape the oldest of them, who's the only girl, and after that situation, because their security is gone, they have to move on to a new space where they confront realities of the lower class. And a lot of people have asked me, when lemons grow on orange trees? That's a weird, I've gotten many responses, weird, interesting, strange title. And, some people even ask me if it's about fruits. So I have to tell them that it's a metaphor. And the reality, or how I imagined it then, was that, lemons could be sour and oranges represent sweetness and goodness. So how a tree that's supposed to bring forth oranges is actually bringing forth lemons. So that's the idea of when lemons grow on orange trees. So I'm just going to read you a bit from the beginning of the book where the family is attacked by armed robbers. Shortly after dinner was when we heard the first gunshot. The chandelier in the sitting room shook violently. I looked at his face as he signaled for us to crouch low behind the dining table while he moved quietly towards the door, taking one slow step after the other. He looked so calm. I wondered how he could remain so calm, and boom, another shot. This one closer and more deafening. The glass cups on the dining table fell, rolled over the table to the floor, and shattered into smithereens. What sort of daredevil armed robbers chose to carry out a raid with so much noise in this day and age? For a while, no sound was heard, not even the chirping of crickets. The noise of the first gunshot seemed to have silenced them all. Just when we thought our ordeal was over and it was safe to stand up, there was a loud bang on our front door. "Please, let me in," the person at the door shouted desperately. I wasn't sure if it was fear or anguish that lay beneath the voice behind the door, but I had this uneasy feeling that something uncanny was going to happen. The banging continued, louder, and the plea even more passionate. The voice sounded strangely familiar, but I couldn't place it, much as I tried. I wanted to stop Daddy from getting to the door, but the person at the door seemed to be in great distress. He sighed and checked the peephole and opened the door. He had seen her through the peephole, Mama Rashida, the wife of our neighborhood guard who ran a kiosk down our street. But he didn't see the 5 masked men hiding by the doorway. They came in wielding rifles, such as I'd only seen in foreign films, and asked us to lay down flat on the floor. Mama Rashida lay beside me, and I felt such revulsion as to want to spit on her face, drag her by the hair, and beat the life out of her. But as my eyes connected with hers, the raw, flaming fear in them ignited some momentary pity in me for her. Then I understood. It was her life or ours. She had been used as bait, knowing we would heed her distress call for help. 3 of the men searched our house and took every pickable valuable, while the other 2 covered us with the guns they wielded. We must have laid there on the cold floor for what appeared to be like an eternity before the 3 men who had gone returned and beckoned to the other 2 as though they were done. I thought it was over until one of the 2 who had covered us dragged me up. It was a huge one with a bad breath. Even though he wore a mask, I knew he was smiling. Daddy, who had been silent all along, stood up at the moment and tried to stop him, but one of them hit him hard on the head and held him down with his gun. He was bleeding, yet he did not stop struggling until he was shot. The smallest of the men shot him as though his life was worth nothing. Just one shot, straight to the chest. I watched as my father fell. I tried to struggle free. I kicked and kicked, but his arms were too strong. He held me down, and tied me to the huge settee beside which I laid prostrate, and stuffed my mouth with a dirty piece of cloth he had pulled out from his pocket. He stopped for a while and watched me struggle till I was weak. Then he ripped Mommy's treasured purple gown and all that were underneath from my body, right before the very eyes of my four brothers, in the most cruel and inhumane way. The uncouth bastard thrust hard into me. So, yeah, so that was the beginning. Thank you. And you can imagine how it goes on because they had just their father. Their mother had died a long time ago. And they're basically on their own. And the young girl who is raped, to imagine what trauma that could cause for her. So it was basically about situating those stories that we sometimes ignore into the lives of my characters to show how it could be us, how, and that was why I used the first person narrative, so I could live through that girl who was going through all of that and, see how it really felt. And the idea was for us to try to see things beyond the things that affect us directly. And I think there's that tendency, which is natural. As a woman, you're likely to talk about the oppression, patriarchy, the first thing that confronts you. But I think it's also just as important to confront the other social issues that affect other people. Because it's when we see all these issues in their full complexity, in the full way they intersect, is how we can really make genuine progress in society. Thank you. Questions? Okay. Two people.
Bio here. A beautiful book. I loved that part that you read, and then I loved your. Okay, you can't. Okay, well, your that description, the imagery. I think I love that. But I just want to ask you like a question about what you said last about, well, taking social issues in context and then not just talking about one particular social issue. But I've always had this thing that, like a man can only fight one battle at a time. So what do you think about something like that? Like, should you just maybe push your energy out trying to fight several battles, or just choose one battle you choose to fight? Like what we're having here, we're having the F word. Like, so like, what do you think about that? The context of your book and all that. Like, do you just choose the one battle you want to fight and say this is what I'm fighting for, or can you? Is it really possible for someone to multitask? Say, I want to tackle as much social issues as I can manage, something like that. I hope you get.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I think the notion of fight you're giving here is like really combative. I have the impression of somebody going to war and something. But you see, I think the idea is that we should be conscious of these other things. We shouldn't be silent when we can speak. So that's what I mean by, challenging those other issues. You can decide, you can be a feminist. I know there's this beautiful scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, that talks about intersectionality. And, there's a way she picks on issues of gender, race, and class and sees how these things intersect. So that's what I mean by looking at all those issues and addressing them. Because, you see, many of these things don't actually exist independently. For a middle class, upper class woman, for instance, maybe gender is our only problem, but there are other people who actually have these issues all together, and they have to fight them. So I don't think it's okay for us to just confront the ones that, affect us, because it's just the simple idea of empathy towards other causes. So do you understand? Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask. I haven't read your book. I intend to. Oh, it's a beautiful excerpt that you read. I'm curious. You wrote this book when pretty much when you were done with secondary school and you were in boarding house. Okay, so I'm curious about your writing process and how the book came to form. Could you tell me, basically your characters? How did you develop them to make them versatile and to make them um, seem real? Like give it a bit of reality to your characters. How did you manage to do that as part of your experiences? Like, what did you observe? How did you expose yourself? How did you decide to develop their characters?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. I think it was actually a bit difficult at some point developing characters, and like I said, it's a very important point. I was, you know, in really enclosed spaces where I didn't see much, and I didn't know a lot of things about a lot of things. But I was also a voracious reader, and when you read about some things, it's never the real thing. I've like 4 years on now, I write so much differently because I've seen a lot of things myself, and I'm able to build my characters better and make them even more real. So, but at that point, it was basically ideas I'd gotten from things I read and how people build their own characters too.
Oh, that was the last question, I'm afraid. Would you please join me in giving these wonderful authors a round of applause?